Well, hello everybody. Once again, good morning. This is Pastor Brian. And here we are in the middle of September now, coming up on our Bible study for September 20th. The season is in transition, so we've had lovely warm and then chilly, and anyway, so here it all. So we say greetings to so many loved ones out there and people who have contacted us and have shared. So wherever you may be, blessings to you. This coming Sunday, September 20th, will be Matthew. The Gospel will be Matthew chapter 20 and 1 through 16. However, since this is Bible study, and I would begin, if we were sitting around the table, leading up to chapter 20 as a refresher, I would turn everybody to chapter 17. And as it begins, you see, the transfiguration, healing of the boy with the demon, the temple tax, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the unmerciful servant. These are pointed teachings, but in many ways they have to do with position, power, authority, who is sitting where, based on old school, old earthly, Here is another hard teaching from Jesus, the beginning of chapter 19 on divorce, followed up by this very, very tender, lovely teaching of Jesus and little children, 19:13. And then it moves right again into the rich young man. And so we have several stories leading up to chapter 20 and the parable of the workers in the vineyard. So you understand these are not isolated individual little parables. They are connected like pearls on a string. But what is also to be noted is the closure of chapter 19, the last verse in chapter 19, verse 30, and Jesus says, "But many who are first will be last, and many who are last will be first." And then as this teaching for Sunday, this gospel lesson in verse 16, we have it again. And Jesus said, "So the last will be first, and the first will be last." And so we have this almost as a parenthesis of this significant teaching, because from here, you see in verse 17, Jesus again predicts his own death. And as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 aside and said to them. And so 17, 18, 19, 20, these are all teachings, because as you see in verse 21, it now begins this triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and Matthew leads us into the journey to the cross. So this teaching in chapter 20 becomes very vital, and just because we have such a very short time, and this becomes topical, I can only show and demonstrate, bring your attention to the pertinent points of this, if we want to spend any few minutes at all on what I would like to draw your attention to. So I'm not going to read the parable of the workers in the vineyard, but suffices to say, the synopsis is that these workers come and they all get paid the same amount. The guys who work all day long and the guys who came in at the last few minutes at the end of the day, they all got paid the same. this is the crux of the story. And at which point now it becomes the salient point of teaching is fairness or grace. Fairness or grace. Now, you see, at which point we can all turn into 3-year-old children. And how many 3-year-old children are adept? I mean, they are masterful at using the phrase, "That's not fair." That's not fair. That's not fair. We learn it when we are very young children, and for most of us, it never ever goes away. That's not fair. That's not fair. I want fairness. I want this to be fair. And furthermore, when you get older, and you will remember this too. So you're taking a collection from the people sitting around and said, let's go get pizza. Who's got any money? And you take a collection, and somebody who only has a couple of bucks versus somebody who's got a 20, and the pizza shows up, and sure enough, the $2 contributor is the one that fills 3, 4, 5 slices of pizza. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. This is not fair. You know? So who's you know, we understand this. And so you can understand now, and you take a look at this into promotions, into job selection, taxes, salary, I mean all kinds. The list is endless, and we never ever stop. That's not fair. You see, it comes into this. And as you look at this story, 1 through 12, what comes to mind? Envy, jealousy, resentment, which is so very powerful. I think to hold a grudge, to be resentful, resentment, I mean, just that word. But all of this, envy, jealous, because the ones who only worked for just a few minutes at the end of the day, they got paid as much as the guys who worked all day long. That's not fair. You see, one of the great stories that comes to my mind of this is the prodigal son story. And as the son returns, and now the confrontation between the older brother and the young son, and then the father has to deal with this. Now, and because we are rapidly running out of time, but just to bring this into focus so clearly for us, I need you to now look at verse 13, 14, 15, and 16. Now here, this is where it comes to the conclusion. And the owner of the vineyard now asks 3 questions. 1, 2, 3, 3 questions. Verse 13, but he answered one of them, friend, I am not being unfair to you. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? You did, didn't you? Yes, you did. Take your pay and go. I want to give the man who was hired last the same as I gave you. Okay? Don't I have the right to do what I want to do with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? Oh, you see? So now we have to bring this into this question of, has God kept his promise to you? Has God brought this? What God said God will do for you. Is this not true? Has it happened? Yes. You see, and I have said it was a lesson I have learned when I was a young man, and I have still continued to learn it over and over and over again. Comparisons are dangerous. Comparisons are dangerous, and you're going to compare yourself to anybody else for your success, for your victory, or for your pain and sorrow and suffering. Comparisons are dangerous. Don't go there. But still the fact remains. God is true to His word, and God will keep His promise. And God is generous as God needs to be. The question to come back to us: has God kept His promise to you? Do you have the blessings that God has promised for you? And there it is. And so from here we go. Now, this upside down and backwards again, as this comes to the conclusion in verse 16. And so the last will be first, and the first will be last. Well, in so many ways of our thinking, that just absolutely does not make sense at all. It goes against our human grain. It certainly goes against the American grain. Where is my victory? Where is my success? The harder I work, the greater my reward. All of those things you see. But the very simple reality is God's ways are not our ways. And we have to understand this, that the last will be first and the first will be last. And we live under the blessings of Christ. We live under the joy of a living and creating God, and the God who does keep His promises to each and every one. So that would be our Bible study for Matthew chapter 20. So blessings to each and every one. God's grace to you. Please be safe out there. Be very safe. Protect your loved ones. Protect yourself. And live in the victory of a living and risen Christ. This is Pastor Brian. Thanks. Bye-bye.